My name is Elizabeth Peterson, but most people call me Liz. I am 35 years old, a senior project manager at a fast-growing technology company in Austin, Texas. I am proud of the career I have built, the independent life I have. But the road to get here has not been easy, and there are scars that time cannot completely erase. One of the deepest, most painful scars was carved on Christmas Eve 3 years ago, when I was 32. The door slammed shut behind me, the lock clicking like a gunshot on a cold Christmas Eve in the quiet suburbs of Austin. "Go away and never come back." My father, Robert's voice, dry and unfamiliar, still rang in my ears over the sound of the wind whistling through the bare branches. I stood on the doorstep, covered in a thin layer of freshly fallen snow, clutching a small gift bag wrapped in sparkling green paper, a cashmere scarf I had carefully selected for Susan, my stepmother. The cold wind blew through my thick wool coat, but the real chill came from my heart. Inside the warm house, the Christmas lights still twinkled cheerfully through the windows. I could imagine the fire crackling in the fireplace, the table still half laid. Just a few minutes ago, I was sitting there, trying to swallow dry turkey and fake a smile. Now, I stood out here, thrown out into the street like trash by my own father. Hot tears welled up, but seemed to freeze instantly on my cheeks in the sub-zero cold. They weren't just tears of hurt or humiliation, they were tears of painful realization, of endings. Ends for years of silent sacrifice, ends for a relationship I had thought unshakable. The man inside, the man I'd spent nearly 5 years of my youth paying off his mortgage, had just proven that my loyalty was worthless. That night, under the yellow streetlights and the silent snowflakes, a cold, ironclad decision began to form in my mind. They had chosen their path. Now it was my turn to choose mine. It all started 8 years ago, when I was 27, just starting out on my career path after years of hard work and unpaid internships. That was also the year my mother passed away after a long and painful battle with cancer. Her passing left a huge void in my heart and seemed to completely destroy my father, Robert. My father, then 57, a once energetic and proud man, suddenly became depressed. He decided to retire early, a decision I later understood was partly out of grief, partly because his finances had begun to falter, which he had kept hidden from his mother. His pension was a small amount, combined with a few unnamed losses in investments that he never dared to admit, and he quickly fell into poverty. Feeling sorry for my father and feeling the heavy responsibility of being the only daughter, I, a 27-year-old girl with a modest starting salary, began to extend my helping hand. At first, it was just small amounts, occasionally giving him a few $100s for pocket money. It quickly became paying the monthly electricity and water bills, regularly around $300 to $350. I told myself that this was the least I could do for my father in his difficult time. But it didn't stop there. A few months after Mom died, Dad called me late one night, his voice shaking and desperate. He confessed that he was in danger of losing the house where I grew up, the house filled with memories of Mom. The monthly mortgage, $1,600, was becoming too much for him to bear. He didn't ask for it, but his words hinted at a future of homelessness. My heart sank. At 27, the age when my friends were starting to save for vacations and their first apartments, I was making a big decision. I told my dad, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." From that month on, in addition to the utilities, I began paying a mortgage of $1,600 a month. And once a year, I transferred a large sum of money, about $5,000, into his account to pay property taxes. In total, every month, a significant portion of my income, about $2,200 to $2,500, went toward keeping a roof over my father's head. I had to work harder, take on more projects, cut back on personal expenses. My plans to buy a small apartment of my own in Austin, my dream trips to explore the world, all had to be put on hold. I consoled myself that it was my responsibility, my love, my way of preserving my mother's legacy. I never asked for a formal thank you. Just seeing my father stable was enough. About 2 years after my mother died, when I was 29, my father announced that he had met a new woman. Her name was Susan, about 10 years younger than my father, and they had met at a seniors club. They were married within a few months. When I first met Susan, she seemed sweet, always smiling and very attentive to my father. But there was something in her eyes, a sharp, calculating look behind her warm smile that made me feel uncomfortable. She seemed too quick to grasp my father's financial stability, a stability that she didn't know I had secretly cultivated. Susan moved in with Dad, in the house I was paying the mortgage on. And then things began to change. First came the expensive renovations, a brand new kitchen with polished granite countertop, an upgraded bathroom with a jacuzzi. Then expensive new furniture replaced the old ones that held my mother's memories. They began traveling more often, cruises to the Caribbean, weekends at luxury resorts. Dad seemed happier, younger, but also more distant from me. The phone calls became less frequent. The weekend coffee dates were canceled with the excuse that Dad was taking Susan shopping. Susan, with her usual sweetness, began to manage the family finances. She tactfully suggested that I should contribute a little more, because your father has worked hard all his life and deserves to enjoy a comfortable old age. My birthday and Christmas gifts, despite my best efforts, were often met with comments like, "Oh, that's lovely, Liz, but that color doesn't match my new handbag collection." Or, "Thanks, but we're thinking of buying a more sophisticated dinner set." My frustration grew into a feeling of being taken advantage of. I was still paying nearly $10,500 a month for basic bills and a mortgage while they were splurging on luxuries. Dad's old car still ran fine, but he bought a brand new luxury SUV. Paid for, of course. Susan kept showing off her new clothes and jewelry. I tried to talk to my father privately several times. I had no intention of cutting off support, just gently suggesting that they reconsider their spending, maybe save a little for a rainy day. But my father, under Susan's advice, or perhaps out of the pride of a man who didn't want to admit that he was living off his daughter, brushed it off. He said I was jealous of his new happiness, that I was selfish, that I didn't want him to be happy. He also said that Susan was very good at managing money, and that I shouldn't interfere in the family's private affairs. Those conversations only made our relationship more tense. My father became more and more blindly protective of Susan, and I felt like nothing more than an ATM machine. My suffering lasted almost 3 years after Susan appeared. 3 years of forced smiles, innuendos, and a growing sense of helplessness. Until that fateful Christmas Eve, when I was 32. I went to my parents' house for their traditional Christmas dinner against my will. The atmosphere was already tense. The conversation was sporadic, mostly about their upcoming vacation plans and veiled complaints about the rising cost of living, which I knew who was paying the bulk of. Then came the gift opening. I handed Susan the emerald green cashmere scarf that I'd been thinking about carefully, hoping was classy enough by her standards. Susan opened the box, held it up to the light, and smiled what I found to be a sickeningly fake smile. "Oh, that's lovely, Liz," she said, her tone complimentary but condescending. "But I'm afraid it won't go well with the new evening dress your father bought me at Neiman Marcus last week." That statement, combined with nearly 5 years of pent-up anger, was the last straw. I took a deep breath, tried to calm myself, looked straight at my dad and said, my voice even but clear, "I'm glad you were able to buy such an expensive gift for Susan. I think your finances are much more stable now. I guess I don't have to keep paying the $1,600 monthly mortgage anymore, right?" The air seemed to thicken. Susan, the master of acting, instantly changed color. Her eyes were moist, her lips pursed in hurt. "Liz, how could you say that on Christmas Eve?" She sobbed, turning to my father for help. "I knew she didn't like me, but I didn't expect her to be so calculating with her own father." My father, as usual, fell for it. His face was red with rage. He slammed his fist on the table, shaking the dishes. "Elizabeth!" he almost shouted. The full name he only used when he was truly angry. "What are you talking about? Insolent, ungrateful. Susan has taken good care of me, don't you see? Or are you just jealous that I'm happy? All you think about is money. Money, money. How can you not think about money when you've been paying this rent every month for almost 5 years?" I shot back, my voice starting to shake with anger and hurt. "I just want you to spend more wisely." "Reasonable? Who gives you the right to tell your parents how to live?" My father stood up and pointed toward the door. "If you find paying rent a burden, if you find it so unpleasant, then don't pay it." Get out of my house now. Go away and never come back. The rage, the blind defense of his new wife, the blatant rejection of my efforts and affection, it all hit me at once. I was numb. No more tears, no more arguments. Just a cold, bone-chilling emptiness. I stood quietly, put on my sweater, grabbed my bag and the rejected gift. I didn't look at Susan, who was wiping away crocodile tears. I looked straight into my father's eyes one last time, seeing only anger and alienation. Then I turned and walked out the door, hearing the lock click behind me like a final sentence. I drove back to my rented apartment in downtown Austin in a state of near paralysis. I-35 was a blur of nightlights and drifting snowflakes. The radio was playing cheerful Christmas songs, but all I could hear was my father's yelling and Susan's fake crying. The anger was boiling, but strangely, it wasn't chaotic. It was cold, focused, and terrifyingly clear. The feeling of betrayal by the person I loved most, the person I'd sacrificed part of my youth to protect, was like a sharp knife cutting through any remaining ties of affection and responsibility. I got back to my small apartment where Christmas was just a small plastic tree in the corner. I didn't call anyone. I turned off my phone. I sat in the dark, staring out the window at the city lights. The decision had been made the moment my father's door slammed behind me. They had chosen. They had cut. Now it was time for me to cut mine. Not out of childish revenge, but out of self-preservation, to reclaim the life and financial future I had willingly put down for so long. The first working day after the holidays, I started acting systematically, almost mechanically. First, the $1,600 a month mortgage. I called the bank that handled my dad's mortgage. I asked for the automatic payment authorization to be canceled immediately. "This is Elizabeth Peterson," I told the customer service rep, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "I would like to inform you that I am no longer responsible for the payments on Robert Peterson's 1782 mortgage. Please update your records and send any relevant notices directly to the owner." No explanation, no beating around the bush, just the cold truth. Next, the electric and water bills, about $350 a month. These accounts, ironically, were still in my name from when I lived with my parents years ago for easy management. I went to the Austin Energy and Austin Water websites, logged into my accounts, and requested to either discontinue service or transfer the account ownership to Robert Peterson. For the accounts that were in my dad's name and that I had simply wired him money to pay, I simply stopped the transfers. Done. Then there was the property tax, about $5,000 a year. I had a joint savings account with my dad, and I put a little in each month so that I would have enough money at the end of the year to pay the tax. I went to the bank, withdrew the entire balance of my contribution. Luckily, I had the transfer proof, and asked to close the joint account permanently. Next tax season, it would be Robert and Susan's problem. Finally, the internet and cable package, about $150 a month. I had signed up for it years ago to take advantage of the tech employee discount. A quick call to Spectrum. "I would like to cancel my service effective immediately." When asked why, I simply replied, "Change of personal circumstances." As I hung up the last call, an almost physical sense of relief spread through me. It wasn't the gloating joy of revenge, it was the feeling of a prisoner whose chains had been so heavy for nearly 5 years had been removed. For the first time since my mother's death, I felt truly in control of my finances and my future. The nearly $2,500 a month was no longer going into a bottomless pit. It was now mine to build my own life. There was a tinge of sadness about how it had all ended, but it was quickly overwhelmed by determination and a newfound sense of freedom. I had no regrets. It didn't take long for the response from the other end to come. About 2 weeks later, I started getting missed calls from my dad's number. I didn't answer. The voicemail started filling up. At first, the tone was confused. "Hey Liz, it's Dad. Why isn't the internet working at home? Check to see if there's a problem." Then a week later, the tone was more annoyed when the electric bill arrived with no sign of payment. "Elizabeth, why haven't you paid your electric bill this month? They sent a notice to cut it off. What kind of business is this?" I remained silent. I had decided that I would not communicate directly. Any contact, if any, would have to go through another route. Then came the messages. My dad started sending longer messages, the tone changing from annoyed to angry and demanding. You have to be responsible for your family. How could we live without electricity, without internet? Are you trying to make things difficult for us? Revenge for Christmas Eve? How childish. I demand that you continue to pay the bills immediately. I read those messages with a heavy but determined heart. I did not reply. Susan did not sit still. She used my father's number to send me messages full of criticism, blaming, calling me an ungrateful, selfish son who ruined the family's happiness. After the first few messages, I decided to block my father's phone number. It was a heartbreaking action, but necessary to protect my peace. About a month after the incident, my Aunt Mary, my father's sister, the only person in the family with whom I had kept a low profile, called me. Her voice was filled with concern. "Liz, what happened between you and your father? He called me several times, sounding angry and confused. Did he say you cut everything off?" I took a deep breath. "Aunt Mary," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Dad kicked me out on Christmas Eve and told me never to come back. I just did what he said. I can no longer afford or support them." I didn't go into detail about the bills I'd cut, just the general idea of ending financial support. Aunt Mary sighed, didn't ask for details, just told me to think about it, but I knew my decision was final. From then on, Aunt Mary called occasionally, becoming an unwilling source of information about Dad and my stepmother's lives. I tried to keep my distance, focusing on my work and my new life, one without the unnecessary financial burden. But the news about Dad and Susan kept coming to me through Aunt Mary. Like the next chapter in a sad drama I didn't want to see but couldn't completely avoid. About 2 or 3 months after that fateful Christmas, Aunt Mary said that Dad and Susan began to dip into their small savings to pay basic bills. The internet was cut off because no one paid. They started arguing more, mostly about money. Susan lost her usual sweet demeanor, instead becoming irritable and complaining. By the 6th month, things were getting worse. The bank sent out the first late mortgage notice. Dad, in a panic, tried to borrow money from friends and former coworkers, but to no avail. His self-esteem took a hit. Aunt Mary said Susan began listing items from the house on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist. The expensive decorations and furniture she had insisted on buying were now being sold at rock-bottom prices. The house began to lose the luster Susan had worked so hard to create. From the 9th to the 12th month, the situation became increasingly dire. Aunt Mary said the house looked visibly dilapidated. The grass in the yard was overgrown and uncut, and some of the paint on the walls was peeling. Rumor had it that their electricity had been cut off several times in a short period of time due to late payments. The climax came when the luxury SUV my dad was so proud of was repossessed by the bank right in front of the house due to non-payment of the installments. That image, according to Aunt Mary, really broke my dad. He became more withdrawn, quieter, and more irritable. I heard the news with mixed emotions. There was a small part of me that felt bitterly gleeful. They were experiencing the direct consequences of their actions, but a larger part of me felt sadness and pity, especially for my father. He had traded the love and respect of his only daughter for a life of superficial glamour built on the sacrifice of others, and now the price had been too high. Then one day, a little over a year after Christmas Eve, Aunt Mary called me, her voice full of panic and disbelief. "Liz, you won't believe what just happened," she said, almost shouting into the phone. Susan left." I was silent, waiting. "Not just left," she continued, her voice still shaking. "She drained the rest of her and your father's joint account, about $15,000. That's all your father had saved from selling things and borrowing money from all over the past few months." $15,000? I muttered. "That's right." She left behind a short letter saying that she couldn't continue living in poverty any longer, that she deserved a better life. She disappeared without a trace. A cold sense of satisfaction flashed through me, but it was quickly replaced by a deep sense of pity for my father. It turned out that Susan's love and care only lasted as long as my financial support flowed steadily. When that gold mine dried up, she disappeared like a mirage. My father, the man who had chased his own daughter out of the house to protect his new wife, was now betrayed by that same wife in the most brutal way. This double betrayal, I knew, would surely destroy him completely. I didn't contact my dad after I heard about Susan's departure. I didn't know what to say. All the comforting words fell on deaf ears. I just quietly went on with my life, trying not to think about the mess my dad had made. A few months after Susan's disappearance, one afternoon while I was at the office, the receptionist called to say there was a letter for me, with no return address, just the name Robert Peterson and my company address. Since he did not know my new apartment address, this was the only way he could get in touch. I received the letter with slightly trembling hands. My father's handwriting, once strong and decisive, now looked shaky and weak. The letter was not long, only about a page. In it, he did not directly apologize for sending me away that Christmas Eve, but he admitted that he had made terrible mistakes, that he had blindly let Susan control everything and treated me badly. He told me about Susan leaving with his last savings, about the bank taking the final steps to foreclose on his house, the only home he had left. The tone of the letter was not demanding or blaming, but desperate, lonely, and perhaps a little belated regret. He wrote that he did not know what to do, that there was no one left to turn to. At the end of the letter, he asked a simple question. "Can I talk to you for a moment, Liz?" The letter sat on my desk for a week. I read it over and over again. The anger I felt on Christmas Eve had subsided somewhat after what he had been through. Now all I felt was deep sadness and pity for the man who had been my world. He had made a mistake, and it had cost him dearly. Susan had gotten what she deserved. The house was gone. He was at rock bottom. I thought about the concept of justice. Does justice mean seeing the person who hurt you suffer to the fullest extent? Or is justice simply about people facing the natural consequences of their choices and actions? My dad is facing that. Will my continuing to keep my distance, letting him sink deeper and deeper, really bring me peace? After many sleepless nights, I decided to meet him. Not because I had completely forgiven him or was ready to go back to the way things were, but because I realized that holding on to hatred would only hurt me. And perhaps this was my chance to set clear boundaries, once and for all. I met my father at a small, quiet, neutral coffee shop, halfway between his house and my office. When I walked in, I barely recognized him. My father looked a decade older. His hair was graying, his shoulders were thin and sagging. He sat huddled by the window, his sunken eyes staring out at the street, tired and empty. When he saw me, he stood up awkwardly. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, he spoke first, his voice hoarse. He told me in more detail about the difficult months after Susan left, about the extreme loneliness, about the shame of having to face the neighbors, the friends, and then the last thing I expected happened. He looked me straight in the eyes, his eyes red, and said, "Liz, I'm so sorry. About everything. About that Christmas night. I was a fool, a terrible father. I was so selfish, so blind." It was the first time he had ever admitted his mistake and apologized directly. I listened, not interrupting. Tears welled up again, but this time not from anger or hurt, but from a deep sadness for both of us, for what had been lost. When he finished, I took a deep breath. "I hear your apology," I said softly but firmly. "And I accept it. I forgive you." A glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes, but I continued immediately, setting the boundary I had decided on. "But Dad, forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. I can't and won't take on your financial responsibilities anymore. That ended on Christmas Eve 3 years ago. You need to stand on your own 2 feet." A look of disappointment crossed his face, but he nodded slowly, resignedly. "I understand," he muttered. I didn't take out my wallet and hand him money. I didn't promise to call the bank or pay any bills, but I didn't abandon him completely either. Instead, I offered something else. Practical, limited help. Focused on helping him become self-sufficient, not sheltering him. "I can't pay your rent," I continued, "but I can help you explore other options. There are housing assistance programs for low-income seniors in the city of Austin. I can help you find information. Contact free legal aid offices to see if there's any way to delay foreclosure or get advice on personal bankruptcy if necessary." Over the next few weeks, I spent some of my weekend doing exactly what I said. I searched online, printed out forms, called several social service agencies to get information. I gave my dad a brochure with contact numbers, office addresses, and basic steps he needed to take. I even drove him to his first appointment with a housing counselor. But I was clear. I'm just getting you started. The rest, you have to do. It was justice in my own way. Not gloating revenge, but forcing him to face reality and take responsibility for his life, while still showing a last shred of compassion as a son. I had reclaimed my financial and emotional freedom, and I would never give it up again. The outcome was no surprise. My dad couldn't save the house. He lost it a few months after our meeting. But with my initial help in finding information and assistance from social programs, he avoided homelessness. He was accepted into a small, clean apartment in a government-subsidized senior housing complex. It was a modest place, a far cry from the spacious house he'd once lived in, but at least it was home. To supplement his income to cover basic living expenses, he started a part-time job at a grocery store near his home. The job was simple and the pay was not high, but it gave him something to do and kept his mind busy. My relationship with my father healed somewhat, but it could never be the same as it had been before my mother died or before Susan came along. We spoke occasionally on the phone and met for coffee every few months. The conversations were brief, focused on safe topics like my job, his health. There was an invisible but tangible distance between us, a newfound respect for boundaries that we both understood. I no longer felt guilty or obligated to provide for him. He never asked me for money again. For me, life really changed after I cut that financial burden. My career continued to flourish. The nearly $2,500 a month I saved was invested wisely. And best of all, at 35, I achieved a dream I'd been putting off for years. I bought my first apartment in Austin, a small, cozy space that was entirely mine, built with the hard work and freedom I'd fought for. Looking back, I don't deny the losses and the pain. My relationship with my father will never be the same. The years of my youth spent shouldering responsibilities that weren't mine are gone forever. But I learned invaluable lessons about setting boundaries, about self-worth, and about not letting someone use my kindness to the point of destruction. I feel stronger, more in control, and more at peace than ever before. The satisfaction didn't come from seeing my dad struggle, but from overcoming adversity, standing up for myself in my own way, and building a better, more resilient life after the storm. My story can be a cautionary tale, especially for young people who sometimes take on family responsibilities too early or too heavily. Loving your family is important, but setting healthy boundaries to protect yourself, to protect your future, is even more important. Sometimes the toughest action is the most self-loving. I did what I had to do. The loss is real, but the freedom, peace, and opportunity to build my own future that I now have are priceless, and I absolutely deserve it. What about you? Have you ever faced a difficult situation where your kindness was taken advantage of by someone you love? What did you do to protect yourself, set boundaries, and still try to maintain compassion, especially when you are young and building your own life? Share your story and thoughts.